Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the August event of the 2024 SalesPad webinar series. My name is Mike Raden. I'm a senior sales engineer here at Cavallo. We have a great webinar planned for you today and every month for the rest of the year. To view those remaining webinars for the year, I encourage you to visit our events page at www.cavallo.com/events-schedule. You'll be able to register for every webinar for the remainder of the year and view any recordings of the past webinars from that page. Today's format for the webinar will be a 45-minute presentation followed by Q&A. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer all those questions at the end. Reminder that today's webinar is being recorded, so again, that will be provided on the event schedule page after the event. We are excited to have Kevin Albee here today, implementation consultant from Cavallo. Kevin is going to dive into Automation Agent today. He's going to help you all understand the possibilities leveraging this product to configure powerful workflows that require minimal human intervention to help you run a more efficient operation. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kevin to introduce himself and kick us off.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Yep. So like Mike mentioned, I'm a senior consultant here at Cavallo. I've been here for roughly 5.5 years now, a little bit over. In that time, I've worked on a little under, I think, 200 projects. For anyone who is local to the Michigan or Grand Rapids area, I went to college here at Grand Valley. Just a little bit about myself, really into music for anyone else who might be as well too. And I am very, very, very slowly writing, producing my own album. Really interested in new foods and restaurants, which there are a lot of in the Grand Rapids area. So hopefully anyone who's been to panels has got to experience that a little bit. And then just video games with friends. But to jump into it, what is Automation Agent? So for anyone who's not familiar already, Automation Agent is a add-on module or tool that we have within SalesPad Desktop. It's been around for a long time, is slowly kind of advanced with new functionality and automations throughout time. Essentially with this tool, we can create automated tasks and set those on schedule to take care of things most people usually have to take care of on their own manually on a day-to-day basis. So provides methods and functions to be able to eliminate the need for manual operations, connects with various integrations. We'll get into some more of those details later on. And then also allows you the ability to have these various automations take place on different set schedules on different days and times. And then there's also a lot of auditing and history logging to kind of get an idea of what automations are taking place, when they're taking place, how long they're taking, and all that. And then also, if any errors are occurring, some detailed information on what those issues are. So like I mentioned with Automation Agent, there are a good amount of different automation types that we have available. So I've got a list that covers most of them here, but I've tried to kind of sequence this out on what the most common are. So some of these will definitely dive into more information, but it's kind of a quick overview for some of them. We have our batch forwarding automation. Essentially what that does is that can look at different queues in your workflow. So that'll be your quotes, orders, invoices, and returns. And that can forward those sales documents on set schedules. We also have our business object batch forwarding. So outside of our sales order workflow, SalesPad also has workflows available for purchase orders, item records, customer records, and so on. So it's kind of a similar idea as you can look at different queues in your workflows there, and based on set schedules, it can attempt to forward those documents in the next queue automatically based on however your workflow is set up. We also have a transfer to invoice function. So that can look at designated order queues and attempt to automatically transfer orders to invoices there. That can also handle partial invoicing as well as looking for orders that are fully fulfilled to be transferred. And then here's where I won't get into quite as much detail at this point, but we also have general scripting stuff that can handle a lot more kind of various general requirements. We have our AR statement, which we'll be getting into more later on, to send out automated AR statements to your customers. And then we also have customer quick report emailing, where we're sending out automated quick reports to users, some automated emails, updated batch entered, and so on. And then on the other side of things, we have some additional add-ons. So these aren't included in the base licensing for automation, but they can be purchased separately or in addition to. So for a lot of these are going to be our e-commerce integrations. So we have Shopify, Magento, WooCommerce, and HubSpot is our newest one. And then we also have an additional one that integrates with PaceJet, which handles a lot of shipping and carrier related functions and processes. So for the screen, to kind of give you a little more of a realistic view of what Automation Agent does, I've kind of listed out some just general examples and scenarios that I've run into with some of my own customers for reference. So like I mentioned before, our sales batch forwarding is definitely one of the most common automations that we run into. So sometimes what I'll have with customers is we'll want to forward orders out of a designated batch when it's within X amount of days. So sometimes we'll have orders that'll go into a batch where it's kind of getting like a pre-picking queue, and maybe they want to wait until the requested ship date is within maybe 1 week or maybe 3 days of the current day. What we can do is create a workflow rule basically on that queue that gets monitored. So once requested ship dates within 3 days of the current day, maybe at that point it'll forward on the document to the next queue or that picking queue. And then otherwise it might just move it back into that pre-picking queue. So that's something that's often used to kind of have that data evaluation happen and take place. Sometimes processes are happening outside of SalesPad, so it's nice to have a way within SalesPad still to kind of recognize once those processes have happened, maybe move it on to the next queue. So some situations I've had with customers is maybe they're adding tracking information to their orders outside of SalesPad, or maybe in a way that they're not able to update maybe the batch to go to the next part of the process. So sometimes they'll create either like a script or some kind of workflow rule to check the part of the database where the tracking information is for the orders. So that might be a daily process to kind of see like, hey, is there any tracking information? No, then just keep it in that same queue, or it looks like it has been added. So maybe it's good to move on to invoicing now or something along the lines of that. One other thing I've done with some customers is automating of allocation on a back-ordered related batch. So sometimes the customers, they're receiving in massive amounts of inventory on the GP side of things. It's possible that their purchase orders that they're receiving to and posting aren't actually linked to any sales orders. So, but they still want to have all these existing sales orders out in their back order batch, kind of take from these allocations, rather than someone having to manually go into the back orders and maybe manually kind of figure out which order you should allocate to based on what might have been brought in inventory wise. So sometimes we'll do that. We'll have some run scripts that take place in the workflow to perform an allocation check. Nice thing with batch forwarding too is it can forward your orders in your designated batch by particular fields. So in particular, we can sort by the requested ship date. So it can look at all the orders in your back order batch and maybe everything with the oldest requested ship date, it'll forward those first. So those can get the allocations since those have been waiting the longest. And then maybe all the stuff that still has requested ship dates way out in the future will get forwarded last. So that way you're making sure you're allocating what you actually want to allocate rather than brand new orders when stuff's been waiting around for a while. For the second example, this isn't always necessary as relevant or isn't as relevant. Sometimes a remote library, another add-on we have, can kind of handle this. But sometimes we have customers where after they pick and pack on the scanner, they need another method to be able to forward their documents through the workflow. So sometimes we'll create a automation for batch forwarding to kind of monitor those queues. So once you're done picking on the scanner through our inventory manager, our kind of our warehouse software that we have, it'll move into a designated batch, and then the workflow can kind of pick that up, and through the automation, it'll forward it, and then that can make sure that things like your smart printing or maybe run scripts or other workflow plugins are getting recognized to get forwarded through. Because by default, inventory manager, when you're done picking or packing an order, isn't going to recognize all those workflow rules and plugins and things like that. So this is one method that's sometimes used with customers. And then another thing as well too is custom development and scripting possibilities. So sometimes the customers, they have more specific, unique needs. So connected with maybe another API or something like that with some outside source. Sometimes we'll look into creating custom development for that. I think in the past, we've had at least one customer that we ended up creating a particular API for to connect with Jira, if I remember right. So again, this is really kind of where it opens up a lot more for different possibilities, but Sometimes we'll do that, or just more advanced scripting to maybe perform checks or populate data on orders imported outside of SalesPad as well too. So it's really a lot of different things we can kind of cover with automation agents, pretty far reaching in terms of functionality. And then next we are just going to jump straight into the demo. So rather than talking about it more, it'll be a lot easier to just kind of show you some of these menus, kind of what they mean, what they look like, some of the initial configuration. And then we'll also kind of cover some of the main automations we talked about a little bit ago. So your batch forwarding, transferred invoice, customer AR statements, and then kind of what it looks like to set up that service, which is used to run the actual automation as well. Oops. So let's jump over there. So key thing to mention is, I said before, Automation Agent is a add-on function in SalesPad Desktop. So by default, even if you have purchased the licensing for it, it's not going to show up in this tab here automatically. How that works is there are files that you'll have to reach out to either usually our support team will kind of help you in getting that, or usually for Automation Agent too, it's pretty common with customers that they'll start up a consulting project, some with myself, to kind of help them get that configuration set up. But there are some additional DLL files that we'll have to add into the SalesPad software folder. Through that, it'll cause a small database upgrade. So technically, you can still stay on the same version of SalesPad, unless there's particular new features and newer versions with Automation Agent. You might want to upgrade to a newer version. So kind of a quick thing you'll have to go through. But once you've done that, you made sure all the security is turned on, which if I jump over to my security over here, should just be security for these three particular menus. Shin. It might be a little more. Yeah, I guess there's a little more, but basically anything that starts off with the automation are going to be the key ones that you want to have turned on. And those will have access to these three menus here. So getting back to the automation lookup, here is where you're going to see all of your automations that you've created so far. So right now I'm filtering, so just kind of look at new stuff. So I can create a new automation here. Give it any name you want to. So we can just start off with our batch forward test. Platform is where you're going to see all of your automations. So like I mentioned before, there's a pretty good list of different stuff in here. And again, some of these do require additional licensing, so things like WooCommerce and Shopify and so on. But otherwise, we've got our batch forward here, which is a default one with Automation Agent. Description, you can kind of put in anything in here. So I'm just going to put webinar for now. And then here is where we're going to see the main automation. So one thing to keep in mind is when it comes to different automation types, so like batch forwarding, transferred invoice, and so on, these are all going to look a little bit different in terms of the settings or some of the tabs, but it's going to be the same general look and feel between all of them. So I won't get into all of these, but a lot of the key ones are for batch forwarding your batches. So here's basically where you are going to see all of your queues in your configured workflow here in SalesPad. So like I mentioned before, this is applied to any queue with your quotes, orders, invoices, or returns. So one nice thing with this too is these automations can be set to monitor more than one batch as needed. So maybe I want to monitor and to mention too, this is going to be in the format of sales document type. So quote, order, invoice, return, your sales document ID, and then the queue. So if I wanted to maybe monitor this here and this here, I would check those off. And then you can see it automatically adds it to the list. So now those would be monitored when the automation takes place. So a few other things to mention here as well is we have our order by field that I was talking about before. So if you have a particular batch that you are monitoring and you want to make sure that orders are getting forwarded based on some kind of field, I can come in here and say, maybe I want to do it by the requested ship date. It's going to usually be one of the more common ones that this is used. And all these fields are just pulling from the sales document header. So we got a requested ship date. And then you can say here if you're doing this in ascending or descending order. So I'm just going to say ascending order because I want to find the stuff with the oldest requested ship date that's been out there the longest or is the far past due. Get that forwarded on and then get to the newer stuff from there if that's something that might be relevant. So again, if we maybe have documents that are forwarding and there's a script that's allocating inventory to these backordered orders, if maybe I was doing this off a backorder queue and want the older stuff allocated first. So that's where that might come in handy. One other thing, I don't use this as often, but there is an hours in batch. So if you maybe want to wait for an hour to be in a particular batch for X amount of hours before you attempt to forward it, this might be a good option here. So maybe if you've got orders that are going to some kind of pre-invoicing queue and you want to make sure they're in that pre-invoicing queue for 24 hours or more, you'd be able to go in and specify that number there. Not something I use too often, but for scenarios like that, it might be helpful to kind of have that restriction in there. Let's see. One other thing as well too is error handling. So this isn't something that I use as much because usually errors aren't something you're running into too often with a lot of these automations. But if you wanted to, you could have these emailed to yourself just so you've got a better recognition of things that are happening. Otherwise, too, one thing to mention is any error that's happening for an automation, you can find that in the Action Center over here. So this would show any errors for this particular one. But then if you use the Action Center menu up here, you'd also be able to see any automations or errors that have happened across all of your automations. So rather than having to go automation by automation through that tab, you just go here and see it. And I think I've got all sorts of just random stuff from testing and things like that. Yeah, and usually with these errors, they'll be kind of dependent on what kind of automation is. So you can see I've got batch forwarding here, and it'll usually give you like the order number or something like that and kind of look into it further. Maybe say like, okay, yep, that's good. I've got that all set. Mark that as resolved, refresh, and then I'll knock it off the list. So one thing to keep in mind, like I said, my environment, I've got all sorts of random scripts and things. So the amount of errors I have in here, it's definitely not something you're really going to run into usually. So we got that there. Kind of related to that as well is you can choose how long those error logs are going to stick around for, whether they're successful or for failed things. So we default to just 30 days each, but usually I'll just kind of change that around, say I only care to see successful automation logs for 3 days. Then maybe I'll keep any failed ones out there for 14 days. So that way you don't kind of have this continual automation log just building up and taking up more and more space in the database. Which if you have an automation that's running maybe every 5 minutes and that's going every day for months on end, you're probably not going to want to continue having all those logs continually building up and just taking up space. So we got that there. Let's see. Next you have the audit tab. So pretty similar to what you see with your audits when it gets to SalesPad and your orders or your purchase orders. Just going to show you general information of when certain things took place and who did it. So you can see this integration was created by myself under the SA user today at 2:14 p.m. So kind of a good way to keep track of various changes. If you want to see maybe something changed, you're not sure when or who did that. Over here, we've got the batch forwarding tab. So this is where we have the automation take place. So a nice thing to keep in mind with these automations is these can either be run manually or on a set schedule. So kind of nice flexibility there is for testing. It's nice to be able to do these manually, or maybe you have an order that you created and you just missed the time frame for how often your automation's running. You don't want to wait for the next one. You'd always come in here and manually run it as well. So how that works is let's set up our schedule first. So through the set automation schedule is where we're going to set that up. So maybe we want this to be daily. And you can see here, there's a few different options we can pick from. Most commonly that I'm using are usually once a day. So I could say maybe like 8 p.m. And maybe that's happening every working day. So I could do that, and that's just as simple as that. Or maybe if it's a little different, maybe it's once every hour. Also predefined options too. There are some kind of more basic ones there of 1 hour, 2 hour, and so on. But with daily, which is usually what I'm using, I can say I want this automation to run every 1 day. And this should be running from maybe 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. And then down here, I can say this should be happening every 10 minutes. But technically, you can have it for seconds, minutes, or hours. The only thing I'll mention as well too is as you are creating these automation schedules, is you're going to want to be mindful of how much is actually getting processed with these automations. So, for example, if you have an automation taking place and it's forwarding hundreds of orders, you're probably not going to want that to happen every 5 minutes or something like that. So you just want to be mindful of however you're setting this up is realistic to the amount of processing that's generally going to be occur with these automations. So how many orders are getting forwarded or processed or transferred and so on. But otherwise, you can see I've got that. And you can also choose a time range down here or a month range. So it's a little misleading how this works. Essentially, how this is read is you would think if I had August 2024 to August 2050, that it would be running now every month until then. But how the software that we use on the back end for scheduling works is this is seen as only running the months of August every year from 2024 to 2050. So if you're ever setting up this side of things yourself, you're just going to make sure you're going from January to December. So that means every month from January to December in the months of 2024 to 2050, this automation will be running every day, 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. every 10 minutes. And the nice thing too is once you set up that schedule, you usually kind of see it over here where it'll kind of read it out in more plain English for you. One thing to keep in mind though, unfortunately, this information, at least last time I checked, doesn't show up anywhere when you're in your main automation lookup. So usually what I'll do for my own personal preference is I'll add that to the description. So I'll say every 10 minutes, 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. So if I've got a good amount of automations in here and I can't remember which one's which, it's kind of nice to have the description in there so kind of get a quick, easy view of like, okay, I've got that's running this time, this is that time, and so on. So that is that there, but once you've got your automation set, all of your settings are good. I've got your schedule set. You can go in, enable your component, enable the automation, and then enable up above as well. Doesn't really matter the sequence you do those three as long as they're all automated and turned on, but that's usually the order I go in. But you can see now that I've done all that, my run now is now available to manually run this. So that would be pretty quick. Let me double check one thing here really quick though. So I'm just going to change my batch real quick here. So I just don't want to accidentally forward anything I don't really want to have forward. So I think I had test one. Only downside of this too is there's not really a search feature in here. So if you do have a lot of queues, it can take a second sometimes to kind of search through and find the right one. There we go. Test A. Cool. Yeah, so once that's set, that's all good. If I wanted to do this manually, I can come over and click run now. And I'm pretty sure I don't have any orders in there, so it's pretty quick. One thing to mention though, if you are doing this manually, it might seem like your SalesPad is locked up as it's kind of going through that process. Unfortunately, there's not like kind of like 10% done, 20% done, and so on. They're kind of just stuck waiting. Usually you're not going to be doing this manually anyways, but just keep that in mind. But since that is good and that's completed, they created this record in here, which is where you're going to see all of your successful automations or just your automations that are taking place. So it's a nice way to say, okay, it looks like this automation's run once, start at 8:15, start at 2:52, and it looks like it finished within that second. So this is nice also if you have a lot of maybe longer automations taking place because there's a lot of things that it's processing through. And kind of come in here and check out the begin and end date to kind of get an idea of like, okay, it looks like this usually takes about 10 minutes. Maybe I want to have this take place or this automation every 20 minutes to give it some time so it's not trying to kind of jump in on itself and start up the next one, the last one's going. But that is pretty much that for batch forwarding. To mention a few gotchas though, is let's see. If you are, so I guess kind of one key thing to mention initially is when automations are taking place, by default, it's trying to use a user called automation agent. So there's this automation agent username. So usually you want to make sure you have a user created in SalesPad called automation agent that matches exactly what's set up in here. If you don't have this setting, technically we've had it around for a few years now. I think before this is introduced, the automation user is just whoever you were logged into SalesPad Desktop with when you install the service. So, but how this is generally done, you're going to want to make sure you have a user call automation agent, just because if you have batch forwarding or something taking place and it's activating plugins like smart printing or split sales document, things that are going to be reliant on the security, it needs to have that user existed so it can look at the security and kind of get a better idea of like, okay, this is how I should be performing this plugin since this is happening automatically. So want to keep in mind with that. One other thing to keep in mind as well too is if smart printing is occurring through an automated forward and there's printing occurring, you need to make sure that whatever user is validating the service, which we'll get to this in a little bit here, has a printer set up that kind of matches what's in smart printing. So for example, maybe I have an automation that's forwarding an order and it's activating this smart printing record here. So it's printing out my invoice test report to my brother HL printer. You would need to make sure that this printer here, which I have available for my Windows account that I'm logged in this computer with, that whatever your user is validating the automation service also has this printer mapped to their user account. I'll kind of explain that a little more later on, but just little gotchas and things like that sometimes you have to watch out for. But otherwise, that is the batch forwarding one. So we'll get on to the transferred invoice as well. So transfer to invoice. One thing to mention as well, I think I had this on the PowerPoint. We also have a transfer to quote to order, which is pretty new. I think we just released that a few months ago, if I remember right. But you can see this already looks pretty similar to what we saw with the batch forwarding. There's not really a whole lot different here. So again, you can come in here, choose your batch. So since we're transferring orders to invoices, we're only going to see queues in our order side of things. So maybe I've got my ready to invoice. So I would set up a schedule. Maybe this should be happening daily, once a day at night. So we could say maybe like 8 p.m. This should be happening every day of the week. So how this would work is any order that's in that ready to invoice queue, it's gonna try to attempt automatically transferring that order to an invoice. So one thing that gets along with that too is if partial invoicing is allowed or not. So by default, we have it set up where partial invoicing is not allowed. So if you happen to have an order in that ready to invoice queue and it's not fully fulfilled, you maybe have an item or two that's either completely missing fulfillment or maybe it's only partially fulfilled, it's going to fail this eval and it won't be able to invoice that document. Unless you happen to have that as true, then it can at least invoice partially what was fulfilled, and then the remaining order can kind of stick around in that order queue and wait for the eventual fulfillment so that can actually get invoiced out. One nice thing we have too, though, is if you're not allowing partial invoicing, which is usually more often the case, you can choose a send a batch on fail. And I don't know if I have one in here. Yeah, I'll just pick a random one for now. But usually in my workflow or customers, I'll create a queue in the workflow for like failed invoice or something along the lines of that. So if you happen to get an order over and ready to invoice and you don't allow partial invoicing, but for some reason it's not fully fulfilled and it's reached that queue, It'll get picked up here, and I'll move that partially fulfilled order off into the queue over here, which again, I usually do like missing fulfillment or something along the lines of that. Fulfillment. So that's kind of a nice way to keep those in track. Because again, usually you'll have workflow, some kind of rules or something in effect if you're not allowing partial invoicing to make sure orders aren't getting to that invoicing queue. But if for some reason someone's moving around things where they shouldn't, or something's going on, this is a nice kind of catch-all for that scenario. And then you can see too, any errors that happen, you can get those notifications over here. See your audits of what's been changed, who created it, when that took place. And then, yep, same kind of idea. It'd turn on this automation, get that set to run, and then it would do that manually for me. Sure. So that is a transferred invoice, pretty simple, not a whole lot to it. One thing to mention as well is when you are in this automation lookup, you can see too all your stuff that is enabled or not. So if I want to, I could unenable it from here rather than having to go into automation and do it that way if you like the disable. Next we will get to the AR statement side of things. So this we've had a little bit longer now, but I think a few months ago we might have added some newer functionality to it. So if you already do have automation agent, this might look a little bit different with some of the settings that we have now in here. But essentially the idea is with this tool, it can find designated customers and it can automatically send out your SalesPad configured AR report to those customers. So that way you don't have to have people worrying about going in and doing that themselves and tracking down all the relevant customers and emailing it one by one. This will just cover it for you. So I won't get into all the settings. I'll try and kind of go a little quick, but you can choose here kind of what the defaults address or the email is associated with the customer if it does find one. Actually, before we get too far into that, so there's kind of a few different ways in how it tracks down those customers that are designated as having the email needing to be sent out. So there's a script option here. So that's one option. Maybe you want all customers with the designated customer type or something along the lines of that. Something I know with my customers more recently is I'll usually create a checkbox user-defined field in the customer card, and it'll either be along the lines of send AR statement or maybe don't send an AR statement. So at least that way, you need to make sure you have that checkbox checked on this new fields on the customer card to actually have it evaluated to send out email. So maybe you have only certain customers that you actually need to worry about this for. Or maybe you want the ability to kind of be more specific to say like, hey, I know these customers are never going to want it, so let me have this functionality here. So that script gives you a good way to kind of have a checkbox or some other logic in there to make sure only relevant customers are getting these sent out. There is also an outstanding balance setting here. So that way you can choose or set a minimum outstanding balance of the customer to run the AR statement report. So maybe it should only be $1,000 or more for outstanding balance to get in that list to send out the email. You can do that as well. And then you can also choose customer payment terms to kind of filter it even further. So maybe I only want this to go out to customers that are marked as net 30. I could do that. You can also select multiple ones too, if that's maybe relevant. Maybe it's more than just one. And then, yeah, so kind of what I was talking about before is once you've got your filter, that's all set in place, then it's getting on to more of who's actually getting emailed. So if you want to, you can choose to reference your primary statement to address on the customer, maybe your primary address, bill to, and so on. For reference, these are just referencing what your addresses are marked on the customer card. Give that 1 second to load here. There we go. Yep, so you can see we've got all the addresses here. So I've got some that's marked as my main one, one's marked as my bill to and ship to and statement and so on. So this is just basically giving you the option to say like, okay, I want to make sure that whoever's getting emailed is the email on the primary statement too, which it looks like is this one here. So be going off of that customer address records specified email. But then if there is a scenario where maybe there's not an email on there, you can also have a fallback. So if I don't have an email specified on my primary statement to, it'll fall back to looking at the primary bill to instead. And then here you can choose your email template. So this is just basically giving you the functionality to say for this automated email, what's that going to look like, what's going to be in the body of the email, and what's going to be in the subject. So for anyone who's not familiar with the templates, it's kind of a really quick overview here. This is menu is going to be under the Setup Utilities tab. There we go. So basically you can create it here. There's all sorts of different template types. So if I'm doing like email template for a sales document, because maybe I have an email or a smart printing that's going out for my sales document, I want to have it default and always say the same thing in the subject and the body of the email, I can do that. But for this one, since this is AR, this is going to be under the customer template type. So right now I can see in the header of my email, it's going to say test customer statement. And then nicely with these two is they can actually populate information from the record itself. So if you click this insert customer merge fields, you're going to see all these different fields you can reference that pull in from the customer. So that way these emails can be a little more specific to who it's actually going out for. Excuse me. So you can see right now, I kind of went to customer and I did my customer name. Again, all sorts of different stuff in here. So most things you're going to want to reference are usually available in one of these data sets off to the side here. But I did the customer number, so that's why this looks a little kind of different here at these symbols. This is what gets picked up. So as the email gets sent out, if it's doing it for my Aaron Fit customer, it would have Aaron Fit's Electrical in the subject of the email. And then down below, you are going to have your body of the email and same kind of thing too. So maybe if I want to say good afternoon and I maybe wanted the contact, I can come in here, say, I know this is going to go to my customer statement. Let me add in the contact person. So that way, again, just makes it more personal and a little less generic as these are going out. Let's see here. Then, yep, again, we went through that. Again, the report itself that gets sent out is going to be based on an AR report that you have created in SalesPad. Those are all customizable if you're not using those currently. We've kind of got a default out of the box one. As a quick example, this is an email that I had sent myself through my own environment in the past. So you can see I've got my test, customer statement, advanced paper company. There's body of the email, everything I typed in. And these reports are essentially just added on as PDF files. But again, choose your report that you've got configured. If you want to, you can choose to include related invoice or returns as well too. And if you're doing that, you just need to specify which of the reports from your own environment of SalesPad that you're wanting to reference. And also choose a begin and end date, so it kind of filters out that information. Usually with most customers, we're just kind of having it start from like 1900 to 2050. So you usually want to bring in all the documents related to those open customers. Usually we'll do some additional configuration on the report too, just to make sure we're not showing any reports of transactions that are only showing them that have an open balance, so they're not getting more information the customer might need to see. And then, yep, again, a lot of the same stuff down below. Got your auditing. And then for this one, the tab's just called AR statement. So again, you can set that up in a schedule, run that manually, whatever makes the most amount of sense. So now that you've seen some of the automations, I am going to jump over into what it looks like to actually set up the automation service. So this is what's looking at all of your configured automations, what their set schedules are, and starts running those for you automatically. So that way you don't have to go in and click run now yourself. Just takes care of it all on the back end. So how that works is you'll need to make sure you're running SalesPad as an administrator. So again, essentially what this is like a Windows service that we're installing within the software. So you want to make sure you run SalesPad as an administrator. So that's kind of a requirement on the Windows side of things. And then at that point, you go to your automation service. And here's where you can kind of come in and get that configured. So I can say install a service. You can choose to do this as either a automatic service or a manual service. Automatic is really what you're going to use 99% of the time. That just basically means if the server that you've installed this automation service on goes down for any reason, when that server comes back up, this automation service should start back up with it. So you shouldn't have to worry about like, okay, the server went down. I need to make sure I've got this going again, or it's not going to happen. It should, in theory, start back up with it. Here you need to log in to your Windows account. So essentially, you're choosing whatever your Windows domain, your domain is / whatever your username is, and then your password. So this is going to relate to your Windows account. So what you're logging into your computer with. So this isn't related to like your SalesPad user or SQL user. This is specifically what you're logging into your computer with. So get that set up. Let me see. I can remember mine offhand. Actually, 1 second. Get this off to the side here. 1 moment. Just about there. Cool. And then, yeah, once you go in, fill that in. In theory, hopefully you've got everything it likes. Say install succeeded. And now what I can do from here is there is a Windows program you can run for services. So this way you can see all the services that you currently have running on your computer or server. So you can see I've got mine here called SalesPad Automation Agent -2. So the 2 is just the name of the database. So if you maybe have multiple databases that you're working with SalesPad, you can technically install multiple services for Automation Agent on that same service. And that is kind of the way that it keeps those separated out for you. And then kind of split side of things, if I ever wanted to stop the service or uninstall it, and see I've got the option here. So I could stop that, uninstall it, and then it would clear it out from the server. One thing to keep in mind is if you make any changes in SalesPad related to an automation, it's possible you might need to go through this reconfigure process, which is just basically going through the same exact prompts that we saw before. So one of the more common ones is if I have batch forwarding taking place, and that's maybe I went in and I just created a new workflow rule for that queue that's getting monitored by automation agent. If I don't come in here and reconfigure the service, it's going to keep acting as if that new workflow rule I created for that batch doesn't exist. So if you're making any changes, maybe you're adding in smart printing to automatically print or something for our printer email where it wasn't there before, and automation agent's forwarding from that queue, you're going to want to make sure you're reconfiguring that to have that recognized. And this is kind of what I was talking about before too, is if you do have any automated printing taking place, you want to make sure your Windows account that you're specifying here, domain, username. So what essentially is validating the automation Windows service, you want to make sure this user has access and specifically map the same name for that printer. So in the smart printing side of things, again, I've got this set up for this printer. So I'm just validating this under my own Windows account that I'm currently logged into, but technically I can do this for other Windows account as well. So I know my account has access to this printer. So if my automation is forwarding the order and activating the smart printing to print out, I know it's fine. But if maybe I'm validating under another Windows service and that user doesn't have this printer and it doesn't have it mapped that same way, it's going to run into an error and it's not going to be able to kind of have that link to know what the printer is that it should be printing to. So that's just kind of a gotcha you have to be aware of. Let me double check, make sure I'm not missing anything else. I know we're just about to jump over to the Q&A side of things. I think that really should be a lot of it. And again, too, there's other automations and things like that and stuff I didn't get into as much, but that really is a lot of the key stuff right there, kind of initial things. Yeah, so let's jump over to Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Thanks for going through your presentation. We do have a couple of questions here in the Q&A chat, and please, if you have any additional questions, feel free to continue to post those in there, and we'll make sure to get them answered. So the first question, can automations send custom quick reports on a schedule? In specifically asking about custom quick reports with DevExpress report setup, but an email containing the default grid view would suffice. I know that was the mouthful. Did you pick up on that, Kevin?
Yeah, so yes and no. Let's see here. So there are two different automations that we have surrounding quick reports. There is our customer quick report email, which we've had a little bit longer. And essentially how that works is it's a little unique. I don't use this one as much. I used to use it more before when we didn't have the newer option. But you kind of have options in here where you can filter to specific customers. Let's see, it's been a minute since I've used this. Yeah, I think it's usually like the contact matching. So you're actually might be filtering based on the customer address records rather than the customer itself. Yeah, so I think you can kind of do something along the lines of that. But essentially, you're choosing your quick report. Probably looking right at it. There we go. So here you'll be able to choose your quick report, all the stuff you have configured. Unfortunately, though, as far as I'm aware, this is just exporting out the generic or the general Excel export side of things. So this isn't going to be doing the PDFs if you have one attached. That would be nice to have, though. So I'd be very interested if we were to do that down the road, but it's just doing the Excel one. So that's kind of the initials, the customer quick report. And then what I use more commonly is um, so the system user quick report email, I think. Yeah, I think this is the newer one that I like more. Again, the other one makes sense if you have maybe a quick report and you have information you want to send out to your customers, but this one's kind of nicer for more internal stuff, which is where I usually see this take place at. So with this one, you can kind of filter. Let's see here. Like I said, it's been a minute since I've been in here. Yeah, there you go. So you can kind of come in here. You can choose what your specific users are, security groups that you're oops. Second, got us off the side. There you go. So here you can choose what your users are that you want to have this email or get it sent off to you. So maybe I'll just go to the admin user and myself. I haven't used this at all, but if you have information specific to users, so maybe if you want to have it sent out to users to only show them open sales documents based off their username. I think as long as you have the username or created by in the quick report, I think it picks that up and automatically filters it. So as this gets sent out to each individual user, I believe they would have their own filtered unique version for them. And then same idea as you've got your quick report tab. So you can go in, choose all your quick reports. I think you can just choose one. I guess you can choose multiple. So again, that's just going to be doing the general Excel export of that, which you get attached to the file. Also does it as a PDF. I think it's an Excel one though, if I remember right. But if it was a PDF, it'd just be a PDF version of the Excel. So it wouldn't have like your attached report formatting and things like that, unfortunately.
Oh, thanks for that, Kevin. Another question that's related: can a distribution list be used for quick reports automation? Where are those email addresses retrieved and stored? Which I think you've been showing. But can you use a distribution list for that use?
So this is where it gets a little tricky, is again between the two of them. So this is going to be kind of more specific to your own internal users email. So your users in SalesPad desktop. With the customer quick report, that's going to be based more towards customers. So if you had it oriented or your data was in that place, you could do that. In terms of where it gets emailed to, I'm pretty sure for the user one, that's just looking at who their set user email is. For the customer one, Yeah, I think it tries to match on the specific customer address record. I think it just picks out one, and then it's kind of choosing from there if it's looking at the primary address for the customer, primary shipping, and so on. And it might be just looking at the email field on that. So, for example, I think it's just kind of looking at that, if I remember right. Other than that, there is one other automation that we have that I didn't mention before, and I've personally never used this outside of one test on my own. Let's see here. Too many tabs open. I think it's just called email. Yeah, so there's this email one also. And I think for this, really all you're doing is, yeah, you're basically putting in a hard-coded list of all the people you want to email in here. So if you maybe had a list like that, you can maybe go about it that way. So add Gmail. Whoops.
Yeah, and I'll just clarify too, Kevin, the system user quick report email does have the ability to use the send to functionality outside of the internal user. So it has a similar field to this email automation that should allow you to send to people outside the system by hard coding those emails in.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those three there, and that would be, yeah, kind of the key options you've got when it comes to emailing with automations within SalesPad. And again, too, some of these are a little bit newer, in particular the system user quick report email. So that's just something you might have to look into is if you're interested in using this, just making sure you are on a version of SalesPad that has that functionality, or you might need to look into upgrading to make sure you have that along with implemented automation agent.
Thanks. Look, can automation agent push sales order in SalesPad through SalesPad pricing? Is this something that can be done through run script, similar to how allocate has that function?
So it's going to depend what kind of pricing is taking place. If I remember offhand, I think there is a script out there to run like a reprice. So that can be done as a run script. I just can't remember what pricing that script hits. So potentially, I would say it just, yeah, it kind of depends on what kind of pricing you're looking at. Otherwise, that script that I had in mind might be something you're looking for potentially.
Okay. And the last question I have here, and that'd be something that'd be good to possibly follow up with support on, might be able to help you or point you in the right direction to get you a set answer on that. How would you handle dynamically setting the summarized to and cutoff date for the customer statement? So I think that was in regards to the AR statement job you're showing, what that summarized to and cutoff date would be.
Yeah, that is a great question. Unfortunately, let's see. I guess it depends on what that logic would be. I'm not sure if there's a great way of doing that, unfortunately, offhand. Let me see here. Yeah, so that'll be here for the report begin and end date, I believe they're referencing. Mike, I'm not sure if you know anything offhand. I know sometimes, at least with a customer AR report, I think that can be referenced in the report, and there's some scripting you can do in there, but I'm not sure how far that gets you. And it kind of depends, again, what logic you're looking for to cut that off. So that might be one thing, because when you're in the report for that customer AR one.
Yeah. So I think the tricky part of that question is setting it dynamically in that setting. It is more of a hard coded date there. I'm sure systematically, whether through a stored procedure of some sort or some kind of script, you could update that or have that updated, but that probably be something to look into a little bit more. And then I know,
Mhm.
Kevin, we've had conversations. I know we have several customers who use the customer object workflow to drive their AR statements and sending those out. And that can offer a little bit more flexibility if you're looking to be a little more complex with how you want to send those out to your customers. So that could potentially be something to look into as well.
Yep, yeah, that's a good point. Because I've had some customers where how they want to go about the logic for what should or shouldn't receive ARs is a little more complicated than what we have here. So yeah, sometimes we'll create a workflow with their customers, and then I'll have like sometimes like automation agent script, which we didn't really get into in this call, and then I'll kind of pick up those customers based on that logic. move it into a relevant queue, and then we'll have another automation to kind of forward it through. And that's where the email, instead of kind of going through this automation, it'll just be more of a smart printing through the customer workflow essentially. And then with that customer AR report too, there is a lot of functionality present there. So we can create custom data sources for that. So sometimes too, there's ways we can do that to try and filter out the data a little more to what you might be looking for.
Awesome. Thanks for answering those questions, Kevin. Looks like that is the end of the list of questions I had here. So just want to thank you again, Kevin, and all of you for spending part of your Thursday afternoon with us. We hope to see you next month on September 19th for a webinar on all things pricing. Brandon Ballenbach will be presenting from our professional services team. He will demonstrate how you can take your pricing to the next level with a wide variety of pricing and discount options available in SalesPad. If you'd like to dive deeper into your organization's specific needs or have any questions about what we talked about today, please reach out to your account manager, account executive, or scan the QR code on this slide for a link to fill out a form complete with your questions. Lastly, when you exit the webinar, there will be a short survey. We'd greatly appreciate your feedback. And just want to say once again, thank you all for joining. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, appreciate it.